Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. I'm excited for you to listen into this interview. This is another Flip the Script episode because this is an interview that I did in the summer on Recipe for Success podcast, where we go through different strategies on how you can quickly become a better storyteller. Enjoy.
How can we say things? How can we use our voices for good?
Good morning and welcome to Recipe for Success. I am very excited today to chat with our guest, Matt Zaun. And I didn't even ask you beforehand. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sweet. I usually always double check that. And I was like, in my mind, I knew how to pronounce it. So glad I was spot on. Matt is a story strategist and high performance sales and business coach with his own podcast, Stories with Traction. Matt is somebody I have followed for years here on LinkedIn, and I was kind of reached out just spontaneously and asked him if he would be willing to be a guest on this podcast, and he gracefully agreed to chat with me here. So I'm very excited. I went back this morning. I was trying to figure out how I was originally connected to you. But then when I looked, we have 381 mutual connections. So I don't know where it started, but regardless, I always appreciate your content. I appreciate what you bring to the perspective of how we can leverage storytelling. So I'm really excited and grateful that you agreed to join me this morning.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time, Nancy, and I appreciate being on the show.
Thank you. So let's kick it off by having you just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what led you to become a business and speaking coach.
Sure. So first, I find the question quite hysterical. I always laugh when someone asks me, how did you become a speaking coach? And I laugh because several years ago, I would have been the worst communicator you and your audience has ever heard. I mean, absolutely terrible at communication. So the fact that I do this today for a living, and I primarily do strategic storytelling workshops all over the country, is quite bewildering to me. So I often get a little chuckle out of it. Not something I would ever have dreamed, even in my worst nightmares, of doing, because I was so afraid of public speaking, so afraid of connecting with anyone in my past. I had a lot of social anxiety as well. So it was very, very difficult to connect. My journey begins with my grandfather. So my grandfather was one of my greatest heroes in life. He was a World War II vet. He actually received his Purple Heart during World War II because during a combat mission, he got shot. And for anyone watching live, my grandfather's Purple Heart is right behind my desk right here. And my grandfather had a profound impact on me. And he shared with me during a conversation at his dining room table just what he believed my life could be. And during this conversation, he really implored me to get involved into the political arena. So as I'm sure you can imagine, someone who was deathly afraid of public speaking or connecting with anyone, the political arena was not the environment I was looking to get involved with. And after his passing, I really felt this pulling on me to get involved. And at that point, I was really focused on data and numbers and being behind a computer, being behind spreadsheets. And I utilized that skill set on numerous campaigns behind the scenes. And after a while, I started working for certain politicians, and I quickly realized no one cared about my numbers. No one cared how good the research was. It really was stories that ended up selling those ideas.
Well, I think that's true in many cases, and I don't think people make that connection. So the fact that you made the connection is, obviously has led you to where you are now. I love this subject. I love the subject of leveraging storytelling and using it in a strategic way to connect with your audience, whether it's from a stage, whether it's in a podcast, or whether it's in a sales presentation. Um, I personally have invested a lot of money in speaking coaches, storytelling workshops, because I I started to figure it out, and I was like, that is the quickest way to connect with somebody and for them to let their guard down in a conversation. So tell us a little bit about how you leverage stories to create those connections.
Sure. So let's just talk about the numbers versus story dynamic for a moment, because a lot of people still love using numbers, and that's fine. And there's nothing to take away from numbers. I think solid research is definitely a plus. It's better to have more research than less research. But in today's environment with so much noise, and it's only getting worse due to AI technology. In order to get above the noise, we have to share compelling, strategic, intentional stories to get above that noise. And a big piece of that is the emotional element. Stories really prompt different emotions in us, and we connect to the story. We end up seeing ourselves in that individual story. So whether it's on a stage, whether it's in a boardroom, whether it is meeting with, one-on-one with a key executive, or even to our teams, the stories are what really have that connection. It really creates that buy-in, and people become more and more endeared to us based on those stories.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think personally, at least in my experience, for me, the more stories I shared, the more myself I became, especially in a sales environment or in a public speaking environment. I relaxed. The more I shared stories, and when I relaxed, everybody else relaxed.
For
Would you
sure.
find that to be true?
Oh, 100%. People's guard it brings people's guard down. They open up to you. It really builds this environment of authenticity, vulnerability. People truly connect over it for sure.
So another thing I really like your take on is you can only script so much when it is either public speaking or presentation. You can memorize, but I feel like a memorized presentation is not the same thing as I'm trying to think of the right word, because you need to be prepared, but you
Sure.
also need to let go of the script and
Sure.
embrace the story. So how would you advise people when they're doing that, when they're in that type of situation?
Sure. So I always say same bones, different muscle. So I think it's really important to recognize we should absolutely prepare. Preparation is incredibly important. And I do think there's something to be said about people that put in the reps, they prepare, they go over their stories, they go over their messages 100%. Absolutely. But they need to be willing to deviate from that script, so to speak, like you had mentioned, when something arises. Maybe there's something, let's say a speaker's getting on stage and the prior speaker made a joke or they said something, kind of deviating from that script and connecting to that last speaker would be very funny in the moment. It would build rapport. It would connect with the audience. So you need to be willing to let go of the like A, B, and C that you work through, right? For sure. But same bones, different muscle. I think it's really important that you know your stuff in case something happens where you deviate a little bit, and then you can go back to the script that you had, which is really important. But absolutely, I think we need to open ourselves up to wiggle room when it comes to this for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was getting at, is because you absolutely have to be prepared. So I'm not in any way suggesting you just walk up on stage and spontaneously think that you're going to be able to spew off whatever talk you want without doing the preparation or making sure that you've covered your talking points that you want to go through. And the same thing, whether it's pitching in a boardroom, you need to know your points and you need to know which stories you're going to tie to your points, but how you tell them might vary based on your audience. Um, I last summer I was giving a presentation to a bunch of doctors, and I had a series of very unfortunate events on the way to the event. And so I walked up on stage and I just started kind of giving them a recap of what had transpired. And they immediately just everybody's guard went down, my guard went down, and it ended up being a really successful presentation. But I didn't prepare that part. I just took the moment and added it to what I'd already prepared, because it's a group of doctors and I was intimidated by them because they have more education than I do. And who am I to be speaking to them? So I was already a little bit intimidated by the audience. And so I think by essentially telling a funny story to start off, it just changed the atmosphere for them and for me.
Sure. And that, you brought up a really good point. That's one of the advantages on focusing on story, is that anything that happens in our life, we can tweak it into a story that really helps us achieve our goals. So whether it's a goal of connecting to an audience, whether it's a goal of beefing up our marketing efforts, fine-tuning our sales process, when it comes to company culture, sharing a specific story in a staff meeting, all the different stories that are around us, that really helps get it into basically our story bank, which we might want to get into story banks later on, but get it into our story bank so we could share it to help us achieve our goals. So that's a really good point. And people want to feel that story. They want to see themselves in that story. The relatability was probably because whatever you're going through, people relate it to that experience.
Right. Two things. So one of the last speaking coaches I worked with, she told me a couple things, and with the second one is story banks. So we're going to talk about that next. But the first thing she told me is that the audience wants you to succeed as a speaker. I think the same thing is true also when you sit down to make a presentation, is they want you to give them something of value. So in a different way, I'm saying the same thing. They still want you to succeed. So if you give people the opportunity to lean into your story, then they're immediately going to then connect to or be more open to the next part of whatever it is that you have to say.
For sure. That's a really good point.
And then the other thing she had taught me was to build a story bank. So let's talk about story banks. You're much more versed on that than I am. So I'll let you share what that means and how to leverage them.
Sure. So a story bank, we'll use an analogy of a traditional bank account. So think of a checking account, right? One of the advantages to having a checking account is you amass money in that account, and then you can quickly withdraw that money. And that's the beauty of continuing to put more and more money in. The more money you have, the more money you can withdraw. But you need to make deposits into that checking account to make those quick withdrawals. So the same is true as it pertains to a story bank, is you're depositing stories in so that you can pull those stories out to utilize for what you need to. So let's say next week you have a staff meeting and you really need to inspire your team to take the actions you want them to take. You have a story in your story bank that you can pull from, that when you're kicking off that staff meeting, you can share that story. Or you put a story in your sales story bank, and then if you're on the phone with a prospect that you really want to flip into a client, you have a story that you can share that really makes that connection. And the same is true with marketing. Now, marketing is a little bit different from both the story banks that I mentioned, because marketing can be very vast. So when you look into a really good marketing story bank, it's very, very robust. So if you were to look into my marketing story bank today, you would see several hundred stories, and a lot of them are tied to intention and very specific strategy, depending on what I'm trying to get into people's hands. From a sales perspective, you really only have a handful of stories. And then obviously a staff meeting perspective, you have a rotating story bank, because you're not sharing the same story with your team again and again. Obviously that's a big no-no, right? You don't want people to think, oh my gosh, what's the time? I've heard this story 17 times. That's the last thing you want. So those are the three I really challenge your listeners to focus on. The staff story bank, that's the rotating, that's the as we're living our life. We're looking for stories around us, asking ourselves, where's the story in this that I can share to my team next week? The sales story bank is having that handful of stories. I recommend 5 right out of the gate. These are your hit stories, just like hit songs on the radio. These are your hit stories that your sales reps can share, that when they share them, the likelihood of the sale closing skyrockets, right? So those are the 5 that I'd recommend. And then as far as a marketing story bank, you can have hundreds, if not thousands of stories in a marketing story bank.
I love that. So a lot of people might say, if you said, okay, well, let's start building your story bank, Nancy. And I might say, I don't really have anything interesting to share. How do you help people start to understand what can be put into their story bank and then how they can use it. Because I think that's the biggest stumbling block most people have, is thinking they have nothing interesting to share.
Yeah. So first off, I love that question because so many people ask it, right? What can I share? I don't think I have anything to share. So I recommend starting with the foundation of story, which is an emotion. Emotion is the foundation. So when it comes to a business setting, there are 4 emotions that come up on a daily basis: excitement, fear, anger, and surprise. Excitement, fear, anger, and surprise. So the way you do this is you zone in on a very specific emotion. So let's pick fear as an example. And then what you're going to do is you're going to build out as many topics as you possibly can as it relates to fear when it comes to your clients. So I want you to think of your clients, think of your prospects. What causes fear in their life? Now, fear is an umbrella emotion, right? Because under fear, you have anxiety, you have stress. So it's an umbrella emotion. So what causes them anxiety? What keeps them up at night? These pain points. And you're not building a story, you're strictly focusing on building out topics. So let's say that you commit to as many topics as you can roll out in 5 minutes. So you set a different timer on your phone, and for 5 minutes, you're going to come up with as much fear as you possibly can. Now, another thing to keep in mind is there are subcategories under different topics that you might be listing. So if someone says, my clients are really afraid of inflation right now, well, there's like 30 different subcategories that can go under inflation, right? So I recommend that everyone listening, they make a big game out of this. They get a little bit silly with this. Try to drive out as many topics as you possibly can. In fact, our most powerful stories are trapped in our subconscious mind, because we're humans, right? We have terrible memories. So there could be an experience that we're having difficulty recalling that happened to us 15 years ago, right? But the way we get it out is through processing like this. So then once you build out the topics, the next question you ask yourself is, what is the ordinary world? What is the new reality as it pertains to this topic? And that really is the fundamental basis of the hero's journey. So anyone listening that's heard the term the hero's journey, story brand, but also movies. So Pixar is notorious for utilizing the hero's journey. They do not crank a movie out into the world unless it very strictly follows the hero's journey. Once Disney bought Pixar, they all started using it. Star Wars, Marvel, they all strictly adhere to that story, that's hero's journey. So the hero's journey has numerous stages, about 12 different stages. The entire basis upon which the hero's journey stands is that ordinary world, new reality. So basically, what is the ordinary world that someone's in? What's the new reality they'll be in when they either listen to you or they buy your product or service? That is spurred on by the individual you're heaping praise on in the story. That person cannot be yourself. It has to be someone else, right? So those are the fundamental building blocks of building out a story. When you look at it in that way, there's a lot of different topics you can crank out and different idea generation that comes from that.
Okay, so can you give me a quick example? Like you can use something that you do. I'm just a quick topic and a quick example of a story that would tie into old reality, new reality. I think that would be really helpful for our audience.
Sure. Do you mind if I use you as an example? Do it right here live?
Please do.
Okay,
You
perfect.
bet.
All right. So can you give me a few topics when we look at Olympic Crest Insurance? What are some topics that would be fear in the minds of your prospects? So what are some fear drivers as it relates to them?
The rising cost of employee benefits, health insurance.
Okay. Rising costs of employee benefits, health insurance. What are some
employee attraction and retention? They are afraid of not keeping up with their competition. They are afraid of not being compliant. They are afraid of not knowing what they're doing. That's actually a big one because it's a very complex industry. It's a very complex topic. And so they tend to default to status quo. They're afraid to look outside the box for new solutions.
Sure. All right. So everyone listening, I want you to pay attention to this. In a matter of seconds, Nancy rattled off a bunch of topics. So from a timing perspective, when you do this, there's a lot of ideas that you can throw out. So based on what you just mentioned to me, Nancy, is there one in particular that you'd want to focus on?
Yeah, let's use the one that people are afraid of not knowing what they're doing or looking or not knowing what they're doing. I think that's the biggest fear that stops most employers from making the necessary changes to get to where they want to be.
All right. So not knowing what they're doing. So can you
Yeah,
think
because
of
they don't understand it. So if we're, for an example, and I realize this is high level, but if I'm talking to a client about moving to a different strategy, maybe self-funded strategy with some different moving parts, because they don't understand it, they're afraid of it.
Sure, sure.
So how do I help alleviate their fears to show them that if they can get over that barrier, they can find the answers they've been looking for?
Sure. All right. So not knowing what they're doing. So is there an example, and you could just give like ballpark, it doesn't need to be a specific client, but can you think of an instance where maybe one or maybe a couple individuals that you've worked with, they come to you, clearly they don't know what they're doing, but after they work with you, then they do know what they're doing?
Yes, I can think of instances like that.
All right, so that would be the ordinary world, new reality. So the ordinary
Okay.
world that they're in is they don't know what they're doing. The new reality that they're in is they work with you and now they do know what they're doing. Now,
Correct.
the hero in this case, especially when you're talking to a prospect, would be a previous client that you've worked with. Okay, so
Okay.
if someone were to say to you, and they might not come out of the gate and say, listen, Nancy, we don't have any idea of what we're doing, right? So they might not use those terms, but if there's hesitancy, there's a lot of questions, if there is just a lot, they're stiff arming the ideas that you're giving them, so you have that hesitancy, you can bring up a story that of someone that was in the exact same position, and you can share how you took them from point A to point B. The organization started in this state. There was a lot of chaos. Here's what the client told me. They were really flustered. They were afraid of looking foolish to their superiors. And then we walked them through our 3-part framework. We walked them through the 3 stages that every client we work with has to go through. And here's what they said after that. Boom, boom, boom. That would be the
Got
new
it.
reality. So
Yeah.
it's not us saying, listen, I'm awesome, I'm an incredible leader, listen to me. We're vicariously speaking through a client that's sharing to this prospect, hey, you might want to listen to Nancy because she really does know what she's doing.
That's a really excellent position, because particularly in the industry I'm in, prospects, employers, HR leaders tend to get defensive because it's something they haven't heard about before. They don't know about it. They haven't explored it. And so they want to hold on to what they know because that's that warm, comfy robe. And they're afraid, of the superhero suit that might be on underneath it if they shed the robe.
For sure. Yeah. And one of the many beauties of storytelling is you could literally figuratively bring someone with you, whether it's on stage or whether it's at a presentation. So you're figuratively bringing them up and then vicariously speaking through them. So obviously you're not saying to your prospect, you don't know what you're doing, you should listen to me.
Right.
You're vicariously saying that through a client. So that's where the strategy and the intentionality comes with it. Now, I do want to make a point that just because the hero lands with us doesn't necessarily means that it's going to land with the audience. So the hero needs
Correct.
to be relatable. I think this is so important. So the hero must be relatable. So a similar industry or a similar title or position is golden when people are speaking to a massive room full of people. So think like a conference. Well, if they're speaking at a tech conference, clearly the individual they're heaping praise on in their story would need to relate with that audience. So I just want to make that point, because a lot of times we might have these incredible stories and they might be really, really good for maybe a book or a movie, but they're not what we need to be sharing in a business setting.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good point, because I found myself on the receiving end of presentations like that, where people are telling me about these fabulous things they did for employers that have 5,000 employees. I'm like, well, what can you do for my group of 50?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
they look at me and they glaze over. And so I think that the relatability, I really appreciate you bringing that up and making a point of that. And, it's know your audience so you can choose the right stories.
For sure. Absolutely.
So I like
Absolutely.
that connection. The other thing that I hear a lot from people is they're afraid to share any personal stories because they're told, well, you have to keep it professional and you have to share the company brand. in my opinion, nobody really cares about the company brand that much. Yes, they want to know that it's a good, solid, reputable company and, that's trustworthy, but they buy from people.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on sharing personal stories to tie in sales presentations or marketing efforts?
Yeah. All right. So great question. So first, I think it's really important to recognize that some of our most powerful stories are personal stories with business themes intertwined. So if it's going to relate to the audience, it could potentially be golden. So I'll give you an example. Most of my clients have children. Okay. So if we talk about an ICP/C, ideal client persona and/or community, you need to ask, what is that for you? So what generation, maybe what family structure, what level of education, maybe where they're located. So the dominant nation and/or state they reside in, what are their job responsibilities, what books do they primarily read, what movies do they watch? You can get pretty specific with that. For me, the overwhelming majority of my clients have children. Okay. So a lot of them are Gen Xers. Okay. So a lot of Gen Xers, they have children. I need to be able to speak to that audience, that generation. In addition, during my presentation, I'll share a story as it relates to my kid or children or kids. I have different kid stories for different situations. And it has to have a business theme intertwined. So my oldest son, his name's Elliot. He's my 10-year-old. He's obsessed with marketing videos on YouTube. I kid you not. The kid loves watching marketing videos. And several months ago, he actually wrote out, I kid you not using AI technology, by the way. He did this by himself, pen and paper, right? So pen and paper. He wrote out a 5-page paper outlining different aspects of my business, sharing with me strategies on how I can personally be a better marketer. Okay. So that would be a golden story for me to share with a group of marketers or a group of business leaders, because yes, it's a personal story. He did it at my kitchen table. However, there's a business theme intertwined.
Right. No, I like that. Your kid's going to be there. People are going to be wanting to hire him before long to do an analysis on their own marketing efforts.
He's going to be my VP of marketing very soon.
Yeah. At 12.
Yeah, 12.
That's really awesome. Okay. So I want to go back to, we've talked about the hero's journey. We've talked about the old reality, the new reality. What other aspects of storytelling should people be aware of and think about as they're crafting not only their story bank, but their storytelling skills?
Sure. So first, I want people to reframe how they view a story. I think it's really important to start there. A lot of business leaders, when you ask them, what is a story? They'll say, oh, I think of a book, or I think of a movie production or a Broadway play. That is absolutely not what we're talking about when it comes to a business perspective. So when it's a business format, we're talking about an experience. So an experience that happened, and you are sharing that experience through story with intentionality, with strategy. There's a clearly identified character in it, and you're focusing on that ordinary world, new reality. When you do that, the story can be between 20 seconds and a minute to a minute and a half. Okay, so a lot of stories you're sharing from stage because you have the figurative power of the microphone in your hand, whether you're mic'd or not. So think of your staff meeting as a mini stage in of itself. Whether you're mic'd or not, you have the figurative power of the microphone in your hand. You can share a 1 to potentially 2-minute story. When you're on the phone with a prospect, you're not sharing a 1 to 2-minute story. You might be sharing a 20-second story, right? That really gets to the point. So I want people to reframe how they're viewing stories. The next thing that I recommend people do is I want them to think of their favorite stand-up comedians. I think it's really important. So think of your favorite stand-up comedian in your mind. And based on everything I know regarding stand-up comedy, and just obviously I'm not the funniest person in the world, but I could still study comedians, right? One of the things that they do is they're constantly asking themselves one question throughout the day. Where is the funny in this? So they get stuck in traffic, they go to the grocery store and something happens. They're constantly asking themselves, where is the funny in this? As business leaders, we also need to ask ourselves a question daily and sometimes a few times a day. Where is the story in this? Where's the story in this to beef up our marketing efforts? Where's the story in this to tweak our sales pipeline process? Where's the story in this to help add to our company culture? Where's the story in this? And then once they do that, It is they need to build a documentation process for that, a systematic approach. And that goes back to the story bank concept. So immediate action step from everyone listening to this show right now is get done listening to the show and then figure out where you're going to house your story bank. You can do this in a CRM. You can do this in a project management tool. You can do this on Google Docs, Apple Notes, whatever works for you. And then you're going to start to do exactly what we said regarding the emotions as well as that ordinary world, new reality piece. If you just do that alone, you will be head and shoulders above everyone else as it pertains to storytelling.
That is such fantastic advice. So to my audience, I'm going to have to go back and watch this after we're done recording, because there's so much gold in this podcast. I really hope that you guys are taking notes, because this is just beautiful. Okay, so I always, speaking of notes, I always make an outline for a podcast, and because I like to make sure that I'm thinking of questions that are relevant to the topic, how I can tie in, how I can relate and connect. With that being said, I also think, for me, one of the principles I like to embrace is authenticity. So I'm not afraid to go off script or ask different questions, because I'm genuinely interested in what somebody is saying. And I think that by being our most authentic selves, it also shows our potential prospects, our clients, our staff, our team members that we care.
Sure.
And then I think, again, I'm using a lot of thinks because I'm not an expert in this area, but it's my perception that when we do that, when we show them we care, when we're authentic, they're more open to receiving the stories that we're sharing. How do you feel about that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, people love authenticity. There's, especially with AI now and everything looking so pretty and beautiful, it's almost like when people are real, they are down to earth. It really does get above the noise, right? Because it's different, it's unique. I recommend this. I recommend, yes, 100% being authentic, but the stories you're sharing can still be strategic, even
Correct.
based on that authenticity. So as a prime example, if you've made a mistake, which we all have. So I've made numerous mistakes as a business owner, for sure, more than I can count. If I'm sharing the individual that helped walk me through that mistake, whether it's my wife or whether it's one of my business mentors or whether it's a client, now we have the individual I'm heaping praise on, back to what we had talked about before, but I'm still being real and I'm still saying, listen, I mess up. I made a mistake with this. And then a client came to me and said, hey, have you ever thought about thinking about it from this perspective? I took that client's advice, and sure enough, we were able to build out a system that now has been incredibly helpful to other clients that have come on board, right? So again, it goes back to, I'm not saying I'm awesome, look at me, I'm the man, you should work with me. It's, hey, I learned this through a client. I'm so glad this individual brought it to my attention. And now here's what we've done since then. It's still authentic, it's still real, but there's that intentionality and there's that strategy behind it.
I think the common theme that I'm hearing from you throughout, specifically when we're using stories in sales, in marketing, is the intentionality piece. We're not just talking to hear ourselves talk. We really are doing it with the intention, with a specific intention, which may change based on the given situation. So if we tie the intention to our stories, in general, they're probably going to land better.
100%. And one of the dangers that I see is ego does tend to get in the way of this. So I want people to go back to that timing again, because people's attention spans are not necessarily shortening. I have a little bit of a disagreement with that, because people are still listening to 3-hour podcasts. They still binge watch Netflix. So it's not necessarily an attention problem. It's, we need to capture their attention right away, right? So people will give you their attention if you can grab their attention and you can hold it, right? But with that said, when it comes to story, we really want them to be short, concise, and to the point. We want to land the plane, so to speak, as it pertains to our story. So where ego gets in the way is often there'll be an individual where they have amassed success in their life. They might have a fancy title. They might think people are going to love to listen to this 7-minute story that I'm going to share, and it's way too long. People are thinking, oh my gosh, when will this story be over? What's the point of the story? They get lost in the details. So it goes back exactly to what you said. We must have intentionality as it pertains to our story, regardless of who the individual is.
Yeah, bravo. Thank you. That was brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to share a personal situation with you because this was a situation I did not know how to use storytelling skills to leverage this. So in 2023, I was named the broker of the year for the whole nation. It's a big deal.
Okay.
Very exciting. You know what I did with it? Absolutely nothing. Because I didn't know how. I was embarrassed. I didn't want to seem egotistical about it. I was very honored. I was excited to win the award. I wanted to win the award. And then I won it. And I didn't know how to talk about it without sounding like, look at me.
Sure.
It was a wonderful marketing opportunity that I absolutely just lit a match. There's a new one now, and I was very relieved when the new person was named because I felt that stress off of my back. So how can I'm bringing this up because I know what a massive failure I was in this area. If somebody does have a recognition or an award or something that could be leveraged to position themselves in a favorable way from a marketing standpoint or a sales standpoint, how can you do that without, again, wow, look what I did.
Sure. So first off, so you said this was in 2023?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not missed. You can still tout that you were broker of the year. You can say, when I became broker of the year, you don't even need to mention the 2023 because you had that as something that you achieved for sure. So it's not missed, even though it's a year later, you can still utilize that on marketing 100%. So here's the way I would do it. I would do a story strategy session where you're building out heroes in your life. And I want you to section them off into different categories: family, professionally, also something else. So something else could be a concept, a framework, a strategy that you've built over time based on trial and error. The family piece could be a parent. It could be, for everyone listening, think of your parents, think of an aunt or uncle, a spouse. It could be a child. It could be, think of everyone that would be under the family. I mentioned Elliot as a hero during this conversation. I mentioned my grandfather as a hero during this conversation. So that would go under the family portion.
Got it.
The professional, a team member, or maybe a previous boss or a colleague or something in that category. You can also add a friend category. And under friend, maybe a classmate. Even now, as we continue to, for me, I was going to say, as we continue to get older, right? Some of our coaches are now
right
in a friend type status, right? So I had an incredible football coach years ago that I would consider him now in the friend category, right? And he helped me when I was a lot younger, and a lot of business principles came out of his trainings for sure. So that's what I would do. And now that you have those heroes, now you can share with people the individuals that got you to the position that you're at now. So as an example, so personally, I'm a very, very strategic person. I got my strategy from my mother. My mother was a businesswoman. My mother thinks many, many moves ahead. As a little kid, I remember numerous conversations with my mom where she's teaching me how to think many moves ahead, almost looking at business like a chess set. So this is going to happen here. You need to be mindful of this over here. So in the event I were to receive that award, I would be sharing different stories when I was in my early teen years and my mother saying X, Y, and Z to me. And I remember that conversation helped position me to get this Broker of the Year award. So you can, and then people are more endeared to you because you're heaping the praise on your mother or whoever the case may be. So I got my strategy from my mother. I got my work ethic from my father. So just to give an idea on who my father is to people listening, my father was a double Ironman triathlete. So think of the Ironman in of itself, and think of a double Ironman. My father, he experienced grueling athletic feats. And I got to witness this when I was very young into my teens, where he would, like, just every marathon, every Ironman, all these different things he would knock out. So he had to conquer the double Ironman. So anyway, he taught me my work ethic. So if I'm ever going to share with a group full of people why I have the work ethic that I do, you better believe I'm going to be sharing stories as it pertains to my father. So again, that's the individual I'm heaping the praise on, as I'm indirectly saying, look at what I've done, check this out, but I'm not directly saying it. I'm indirectly saying it through the different heroes that I'm positioning in the story.
I love that. That was, That was not on the question list, but you made me think about it. And I'm like, okay, I'm really curious about this. All right. So because I do like to be respectful of everyone's time and I try to keep this around 40 to 45 minutes, we are going to jump right into the fun part of the show, which includes my 5 burning questions. And of course, my first question, it ties the name of the podcast, Recipe for Success, to one of my favorite things to do, which is cooking. So what is your favorite food in the world and can you cook it?
All right, so this might sound boring, but it's been very exciting to me based on the results. So my favorite food is shredded chicken. I absolutely can cook it. I use an Instant Pot about 3 times a week, and I go through a lot of chicken. Now, here's why I'm excited. I've already lost 20 pounds this year so far, and I'm on my way to losing another 20 pounds. So by the end of the year, I'll be down 40 pounds based on a lot of chicken consumption. I have a ton of different hot sauces in my fridge. So in order to kind of like change it up, I'll have different sauces and utilize that. So that is why, even though it might be boring, it's very exciting to me because it's helping me hit my fitness goals for sure.
That's amazing. Okay, so now I know you like hot sauce, and I have some hot sauce. I will send you because one of my good friends has a hot sauce company, and it's award winning.
Okay,
Bear River
awesome.
Bottling. So he has some amazing. So sweet. Now I love opportunities like that. All right, so this one's a little bit deeper than food. But what character trait do you admire most in other people, and why?
I love this question. Slow to anger. So first, let me say that this is something I've very much struggled with in life, especially as a father. So I have 3 kids. I have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So I'm sure your audience can imagine a very wild bunch. There have been times where things aren't going and I tend to yell or I get super flustered. So I've done everything I possibly can to remain calm, cool, and collected, to show an element of patience, which I'm continuing to work on. I kind of think it's a little bit funny that my kids have positioned me for very challenging situations in the business world, because if I can withstand 3 little kids and the anger of 3 little kids, the boardroom is a piece of cake, right? So I value individuals that are slow to anger in every regard. So I mentioned my political experience. So obviously when I'm watching a debate and you can clearly see someone trying to get under someone's skin and push their buttons, and that person just has an incredible demeanor, they take it with stride and they're still able to connect with their audience. That is a highly desirable skill set that I see, and one that is a muscle. They've trained that over the years for sure. So it's something that I'm constantly working on. It's something I'm constantly mindful of because I do value it so much, but I would definitely say individuals that are slow to anger.
That's a really great answer. I've never had anybody bring that up before, but I like it. I could definitely work on that myself. So I appreciate that. Okay, so now I get to flip the script on you and say, what character trait in yourself are you most proud of and why?
What character trait in myself?
Mm-hmm.
I like to play the long game. So, I'm going to use the word in a different way. I used the word patience before as it pertained to anger, and that's one thing. But patience as it pertains to that goal coming to fruition, so to speak. I'm an incredibly patient person. I feel like I'm a pretty terrible starter, but I'm an excellent finisher. And that's been a constant theme in my life, where I'll start a project and it's just not good. I'm willing to start it. I'm willing to go through it, but I kind of look like a fool at first, but I'm really good at finishing, which really ties into that patience piece.
So the long game, and that must come from your mom.
Oh, for sure. 100%.
Yeah, I was paying attention. Okay, so what's one thing that anybody who's listening today or tomorrow or whenever you happen to listen to this can do to become a better storyteller?
Anything? Can I get a little bit fun?
You can.
Make a game out of being uncomfortable. Okay, so let's take this out to a little bit further of an extent. So you can become, so I'm sure everyone listening would say, I want to be a better storyteller, not a worse storyteller. I want to be a vibrant, inspiring, persuasive communicator. I don't want to be a dud or boring, right? Everyone listening would want that. The problem with that is, in order to be incredible when it comes to speaking, you have to get incredibly uncomfortable. You can speed that process up. Okay, you can radically speed that process up. So, as an example, for you to be a world-class communicator, it can take, I'm just throwing it out, and it depends on the person and many different variables, but let's say it takes half a decade, 5 years to amass that level of success. You can radically speed it up and do in a matter of sometimes even several months if you're willing to get incredibly uncomfortable and make a game out of it. So a prime example that I did was I did a ton of improv comedy. Now, here's what's interesting about that. A lot of people think, oh, Matt, were you like a comedian? And like, no, I was the weak link. I was terrible at improv comedy. I did it to get my reps in. I did it to get on stage with bright lights and people throwing suggestions at me and me stumbling and looking like a fool in front of packed houses. We packed audiences, right? So when you're looking like a fool in front of a bunch of people and you get those reps in, business communication becomes a cakewalk. So you can do it in a systematic way. So there's different improv comedy, even business trainings all over the United States. Comedy Sports is notorious for that. So if you just Google Comedy Sports and you look up a local chapter, that's one way you can do it. They have different business seminars that they put on and different workshops. You can become part of an adult improv comedy group for a couple months. That's another way. There are story slams that take place all over the country. So you can check that out. I believe it started with the Moth in New York City, but it branched out where you get 5 minutes to go with an open mic, right? You go up to the open mic and you share your story, with a different theme, but figure out a way to get uncomfortable quickly and make a game out of it where you can literally say, this month, I'm going to get uncomfortable 5 times this month. Here's what I'm going to do. And by doing that like a muscle, you're training that muscle. And then as you get on stage, as you get in front of your team, it gets way, way, way easier based on training that muscle.
Yeah, I love that. One of the coaches I work with made me sing. And let me tell you, I am not a singer, but she made me sing. And I would literally I was only singing to her and I was sweating because it made me so uncomfortable. But then when I had to, run through my talk with her, I was way less stressed out because I'd already gone through the uncomfortable part. So I didn't think about it in the way that you just framed it, though. I didn't even know why she was making me do it.
Sure.
But now it makes sense. And I think that's a fantastic suggestion. I love that.
Let me jump in real quick because you mentioned singing. Okay. So I want people to think of amazing singers. A lot of it is planned. They move their head a certain way. They walk a certain way. They've done it so much that they know when they say or when they sing this line and they tilt their head this way, the audience goes ballistic. So the 3 individuals that I think of that are amazing at this, Freddie Mercury, Beyonce, and Taylor Swift. All of them.
I knew that's exactly what you're going to say.
Just incredible when it comes to movements, right? They really know how to engage. They have incredible stage dynamics. We can actually learn a lot as business leaders on how to handle ourselves in larger audience based on the way we move, the way we connect. So singing is awesome for sure. You don't need to be a great singer. You can just look at different singers and see how do they move on stage? How do they connect? Why do they have these certain movements? I appreciate you bringing that up.
I love that. All right. This is a fun one. So what's your secret talent or something people would be surprised to learn about you?
How about we go with the surprise? Surprise to learn about. I accidentally taught myself the worm in high school. So the dance move, the worm. So accidentally. Accidentally. So I was a wrestler. I wrestled for 10 years. And in wrestling, there's a drill that is called the sprawl. You have to do numerous sprawls back. Basically, a lot of times you get points by going in and you're taking someone down. So you're grabbing their leg or both legs and you're taking them down. So it's called a takedown. And in order to get really good at defending against that in practice, you do what's known as a sprawl, where you're jumping back and the way you fling your body back. Well, one practice I did this, and while I was on the ground, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if I just tweaked my body a little bit this way, I wonder if I could do the worm. and I was able to do the worm across the wrestling mat. And then I believe, and don't hold me to this, it's been so long now, but it was a couple weeks or maybe even a month later, there was a school dance that we had. And during the dance, there was a song that came on that would be conducive to like a break dance type song. And I was like, this is my moment. This is do or die. And it was so funny because I wasn't even really that good at starting it. So I just walked to and keep in mind, I had a ton of social anxiety back then. So this was like a big deal for me. If I blew it, I was going to be the mockery of the whole school. So I walked out to the center of the dance floor and I just laid down, which is not really how you start the worm. I just laid down and everyone was like, what on earth is this guy doing? And sure enough, I did the worm across the entire gymnasium and people went berserk. It was the talk of the school the next day. So.
And then the next time you were in a wrestling match, you just pulled the worm out to stun your opponents because they're like, what the hell is this guy doing?
Yeah, I know. So even so I had a back injury a couple of years ago, so I haven't done it since, but about a couple of years before my back injury, I did it at a wedding and it went off really, really good. So I was still able to do it even older. So.
Okay, I love it. All right, Matt, the worm's on. Now it's your new nickname. All right, last question. So who is the one person, famous or not, living or not, that you would most love to be able to sit down and have a cup of coffee and a conversation with?
So I love the question. So it would be my grandfather. It would absolutely be my grandfather. So my grandfather's passing was a very dark time in my life, one of my greatest heroes. I relied on him a lot for his strength. I feel like as crazy as the world gets, to be able to sit down with him and have another conversation, I think would be absolutely incredible. So it would absolutely be my grandfather.
I love it. Well, Matt, I really appreciate your time this morning. I think we covered some really important topics. I'm not joking. I'm going to go back and listen to this again because there's a lot of notes that I need to take. I will probably be reaching out to you separately from this as well. I have some ideas. But thank you so much. If people want to know more or would like to connect with you and find out about your services, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Awesome. Appreciate the question. So they can go to storieswithtraction.com. That's my website. All my information is on there. And then just like you and I connected over LinkedIn, they're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well.
Okay. And then your podcast also, is that, can they find that on most of the streaming platforms?
Yeah, so on all streaming platforms, the podcast is also Stories with Traction. And if you go to my site, there's a podcast tab and it shows all the top episodes I recommend people start with. And you can also see a catalog of episodes on that site as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Matt. And enjoy the sunny summer day.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Appreciate your time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.